Today, which is August 14th, was my mother's birthday. She was born in 1921, so she would have been 98 this year if she had lived, but she died in the year 2000. I always do something to celebrate my mother on her birthday. When I was teaching in China, I had a birthday party in my class. In Italy, I had birthday parties at home and invited people over. And today I'm going to make apple crumble. Apple crumble has been a huge favorite with people all over the world since I've been traveling around in Argentina, in China, Italy, Cambodia, everywhere. My old friend Sophie from Belgium used to come over every night for 4 or 5 months to have some crumble. And I used to make different crumbles. Apple crumble is the classic, and that's the one my mother always made in the winter months on Sunday for the dessert. On Sunday after we'd had roast lamb, then we'd have apple crumble and custard. And the apple crumble that she made was a very old-fashioned, clean type, probably from the recipe of Mrs. Beaton. And I'm going to start there, but this is going to be part of a series which I call the Chameleon Cook. And I'm going to write a book called The Chameleon Cook too. And it's going to be about how you take a basic recipe like apple crumble, or possibly like shepherd's pie, or eggs Benedict, or rice and beans, and how you just play around what the English used to call ring the changes, and you make all kinds of different things. I can imagine, quite literally, 100 different ways to make fruit crumble. And I'm going to start the process in this video. So let's begin. And now, part of the point of the Chameleon Cook is to help you to ring the changes and be inventive, creative. But also, it's to wean you away from recipes and get you to understand that underlying a recipe is a basic principle. It's very much like the study of linguistics, where you look at different words and you suddenly realize, oh, wait a minute, they all have the same underlying principle. Carnivore, herbivore, insectivore, voracious. That vor part must have something to do with eating. Insectivore eats insects, carnivore eats meat, herbivore eats herbs or eats green things, and so on. You see the underlying principle. That's what Gregory Bateson called deutero-learning, that getting under just learning individual things. So if you can take a bunch of recipes and not see that under them are underlying principles. That's part of what it is to be a chameleon cook, is to see underneath the basic recipe. So I'm going to try to wean you away from recipes and get you into understanding ideas. So what's the idea of apple crumble? Very simple. It's got 2 layers. The bottom layer is fruit, and the classic apple crumble is, of course, a layer of apples. And then the top layer is the crumble. And you'll see from my videos as they progress that I prefer something like 1 to 3 ratio 1 part crumble, 3 parts apple, although it's kind of variable. But here's the first principle. Get away from the idea of a cup of this or a tablespoon of that or those kinds of things, and start thinking in terms of ratios. Okay, so we've got approximately 1:3 ratio of crumble to apple. Now let's look at the crumble. The crumble has 4 components. They are oats, flour, sugar, and fat. And they are in a ratio of 2 to 2 to 1 to 1. 2 parts oats, 2 parts flour, 1 part sugar, 1 part fat. Now let's start making the crumble. And we're going to start with the topping. Okay, you can see I have a mixing bowl, which is not really a mixing bowl. It's actually one of my casseroles, but I don't have a lot of kitchen equipment, unfortunately. I don't have a well-equipped kitchen, but I do well enough. Okay, so I've got a mixing bowl, and I've got a cup to measure. And the first thing I'm going to do is measure the oats. So we're going to have 1 cup of oats and 1 cup of all-purpose flour. Now you know my ratios are 2 to 2. That means that a unit ratio here is half a cup. So I have 2 half a cup of oats, 2 half a cup of flour, and now I'm going to add half a cup of sugar and half a cup of sunflower oil. Okay, now let's start here with the substitutions idea. We'll move on in a little bit, but I just want to start here and say, okay, I'm using sunflower oil, but classically, apple crumble is made with butter. And what you do, you've got half a cup of butter, cold, you chop it up very, very fine, and then mix it in with the other ingredients, and you can maybe use a pastry knife or whatever to just chop it all up. I used to use a food processor to get it all looking more or less like coarse sand. But the thing about butter is that it contains a lot of saturated fats, which are not very good for my arteries. And at the age of 68, I'm very concerned about my arteries and my cholesterol and my triglycerides and all the rest of it. So I have substituted sunflower oil instead of butter. Now it doesn't taste the same. I miss the buttery taste in a way, but I think I'd rather be alive missing the buttery taste than dead enjoying it. All right, so there's the first substitution. So you can imagine that you can substitute any fat, but I wouldn't want to substitute a really healthy fat like extra virgin olive oil because it's going to add an olive flavor that I don't like in apple crumble. But sunflower oil, which is relatively free of taste, is okay as a substitute for butter. Now the next step is to prepare the apples. You can do this in a number of ways. Some people like to peel the apples because they don't like the peel in the apple crumble, but I actually quite like the peels, and they add fiber, and they seem to look okay to me anyway. So I am going to chop up 3 apples. I'm going to core the apples just by cutting the sides open and then chopping them. That's 3 apples. I'm going to place them in a heat-proof dish, and then I'm going to cover them with the crumble. And I'm going to smooth the crumble out so that all of the apples are completely covered and evenly covered. And I'm going to bake in an oven for approximately an hour at 200 degrees Celsius. I'm going to keep an eye on it because my oven is not very reliable, and I want to make sure that the apples cook, and I want to make sure that the crumble crisps Now what that's going to mean is that at some point I'm going to have to keep checking to make sure that the top is browning, and if it's not browning, then I'm going to turn on the broiler just to make sure I get a little even browning on the top. All right, here's the crumble. After about 35 minutes, you can see that the apples are bubbling away nicely, but the top has not browned, so I'm going to turn the grill on and I'm going to brown that up, and then we'll be ready to go. All right, so I did actually turn the broiler on, and here's the finished product. 10 minutes under the broiler, and it's nice and golden and ready to eat. Okay, well here's a still of the finished product, and you can see that I got the ratios right. And here's the first tasting. And it was in fact delicious, just as it was. The balance of apples and crumble was pretty much the way I wanted it, and the crumble was nice and crisp. Now I did add a little bit of whipped cream eventually because I happen to like it, but this is about crumble, so I just put that at the end to show that you can dress up the crumble in a lot of ways. But now I want to talk about the chameleon side of things. The standard apple crumble, the old-fashioned one, was considered to be what they call a clean taste. That was because it had very little in it apart from the crumble topping with white sugar and apples, and that was it. Now my mother used to put sugar on the apples themselves. I don't want too much sugar. Half a cup for a whole apple crumble is more than enough sugar for me, so I don't put any in the apples. But you can. That would be one. Or you can put spices, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, allspice. You can do all of those things, but that takes you away from that clean taste. But you can do it. You can add raisins to the apples. You can add anything you want. Sliced fresh ginger. That's very nice. Apple and ginger crumble. Beautiful. Well, once you start thinking in those terms, then you start thinking, well, apple and what? Apple and blackberry, that's really nice. Apple and raspberry, also really nice. You don't want to make a crumble out of nothing but berries because they're a bit too soft and they break down when they're cooked and they're mushy. But if you have some apples in there, about half and half works very well. Apple and raspberry is one of my favorites. We can just completely change the fruit entirely. Peaches, very nice. Or here in Cambodia, I frequently add lychees or rambutan or any of the fruits that are available in the tropics, either mixed and matched or on their own. Like papaya by itself is really nice. Papaya and mango doesn't really do very much except complement each other a little bit. But if you have something very different like apple and lychee, that's really nice. So that's the fruit part. So you can do whatever you want, keep the topping the same. Or you can change out one of the ingredients or more than one of the ingredients in the topping. You'll notice that I used cane sugar rather than white sugar. That's because it's more readily available, maybe a little bit healthier than white refined sugar, or maybe not. You can, of course, change butter and sunflower oil or whatever fat suits your fancy. I mean, I wouldn't use margarine myself personally, but you can use it if you want, or some kind of butter substitute. You can use whole wheat flour. You can use something besides the oats. Now there it gets really kind of complicated because the oats are really the backbone of the crumble. But you can do something that is kind of oatish, like muesli, that is heavy in oats but also has nuts and dried fruit and other things in it. Or you can go way out on a limb and find another cereal that is rolled, like rolled rice, which we actually have here in Cambodia. I think once you start getting too far away from the oats, you start getting too far away from crumble as I know it. And you have to remember that the chameleon cook has to still have in mind the skeleton of the thing that you're trying to make. So if you go too far away, then it's somehow or other not really crumble anymore. Like as if you are using whole wheat flour, or no, rice flour, let's say rice flour and rolled rice and sugar and oil. I don't know, but I mean it might be all right, but this is the point about being a chameleon cook. You have to experiment. And the small compensation for bad experiments that don't really work out too well is that, well, you get to eat them, but then you know better and you won't do it again. So try your best to alter the recipes as much as possible to suit your tastes. One thing I will say is that baking is a little bit unforgiving. The 2-2-1-1 ratio in the crumble is not very forgiving. If you start tinkering about with it too much, you're going to get into trouble. It's not like cooking a stew or a soup, where if you only put half the meat in, or you put only half the parsnips, or you trade the carrots for parsnips, doesn't really make much difference. But if you start messing with the ratios in baking too much, you're going to get into a lot of trouble. Anyway, have fun, and remember to wish my dear old mother a happy birthday.